This is a production of Cornell University.
Today, our guest is Dr. Doug Soldat at the University of Wisconsin-Madison, the Soil Sciences Department there. Doug does a lot of work on soil physical properties, a lot of stuff in golf, but today we're going to get his thoughts on some maybe some common lawn issues. So with that, Frank, I'll hand it over to you and we'll get started.
Thanks, Carl. So, Carl, this is our 9th one in 3 weeks. I'm starting to see you on this thing more than I'm seeing my family. So thanks for hanging in there with me. Big kudos to Carl for keeping these going, and thanks again, Doug, for joining us. I'm going to yak for about 5-10 minutes, and then we're going to have a conversation and hopefully provide some meaningful technical information. But much of it is a distraction right now, right? I think all of us are trying to find ways that we can continue to enrich our lives without having the normal parts of our life available to us, the things that do enrich our lives. And so I just love Joe Fern. I love this guy at Drury Grounds. He's a blogger on TurfNet. And I think, it's a good way to start to think about, listen, where our lives and things are different. And I think that means, it's important that we look at things a little bit differently. And this is most important, in my opinion, in the lawn and grounds area where it's so much aesthetically driven, right? So much of people walking through and look at the flowering plants there. And what Joe just did that I just think is so spectacular, and really want to make a shout out to him and encourage you to do this, is his using Twitter, and maybe there's other ways you can do it, of trying to share the spring at his campus with the students. I mean, what do we have these plants here for? How odd is it to see something so beautiful that no one walks through other than the people who care for it? It's got this eeriness to it that maybe sharing it will help us sort of get around that, right? I know for us here in the Northeast, we've been locked down for, several weeks now. And I think the longer you have to have your life in modern society like this, I think these adaptations and reaching out like Joe's doing is important. Now, if you're in the lawn care landscape business, are you communicating with your customers? Do you have pictures of what their landscape might have looked like in the past and say, hey, we were able to do this. I can't get out there and do the things I normally do, right? Are you communicating with your customers about this? I would say, again, we're asking golf course superintendents to talk to their golfers. We're asking sports turf managers to talk to coaches and players and community members. Hey, here's how we're managing this resource while you're away. It's such a good time to raise your professionalism, raise your knowledge level, your standings, your credibility with your clientele, with your stakeholders about what you're doing, because I promise you, they never see it. Much of what you do is invisible until they see a flower, or maybe they see something that they object to. Either way, just a quote from our new global development chair. We started a new department here at the College of Ag as we reimagine ourselves without the Dyson School of Business in it anymore. We don't have the Ag Economics Department in the College of Ag. And so we're starting to consolidate into larger issue units. And I'm in the School of Integrative Plant Science, and my colleague Wendy Walford is in global development. And I just would second her sentiment here. I don't like talking at a computer screen. I much would rather be walking around Brooklyn with Doug like we were supposed to do a few weeks ago. But this is what we got, and I think sharing it together is a really important part of moving forward. So let's see if we can distract ourselves a little bit with grown grass. One of the things we do in addition to these webinars is publish our weekly newsletter. We're in our 21st year of doing it. We've published, of course, 2 issues so far this year. And if you'd like to get access to it, feel free to contact Carl at that email and he'll get you on the list. Cooperative extension in New York State, right? I'm a member of the land grant institution here in New York, and I know the University of Wisconsin-Madison and Doug's turfgrass program out there has a COVID-19 resource area. I think these kinds of things are good to bookmark now, because overnight, yesterday, golf wasn't allowed. In 1 minute it was allowed, the next minute it wasn't. Landscaping was allowed, now it's altered for cosmetic purposes. So my advice to you as a professional in this business is to find a collection of websites you feel you can trust and rely on. This is the one Cooperative Extension puts together as part of our land grant mission, connected to the New York State Department of Ag and Markets and the DEC. The things that impact horticulture in New York State and agriculture in New York State will be brought to you by these particular, at these websites here. Now, as I said, the state just came out again this morning. I think it's this morning. Yeah, it's this morning at 7:30. And I think this is a bit of a change, and maybe it came out yesterday, that essential services, landscaping is part of it, but only for pest control, not cosmetic purposes. It's very interesting, right? Because if you look at that word cosmetic, right, Doug? Remember when you were here, we used to talk about cosmetic use of pesticides? So, right, you have to now separate. Are you controlling something that's a problem, or are you killing a weed because it's cosmetic? Are you controlling disease because you don't like brown grass? Or is it for real? Now, I haven't seen any guidance on this, and we can talk about this later as we move along, but it does raise some questions if you're interested in thinking about it. Now, in the lawn and grounds area, there's some good local resources, right? The New York State School Facilities Management Association did a survey of school districts. I talked about it a little bit yesterday with the sports turf guys, because, you got sports turf guys in schools. And the survey with about 80 respondents is saying, yeah, some people have no maintenance staff on at all. Some are at full or near, some are limited, some are just doing emergencies. I think it's good to keep your eye on this, because it helps you communicate to your administrators if they're saying, hey, how can we manage the Cornell campus with 5 guys, Dan? Or do I need, 20 guys or 40 guys or 80 guys, right? So what are other people doing? I think is a critical part of the discussion. And of course, our director of grounds here, Dan Scheid, said, made a shout out to his professional organization. I would say a leading organization in the grounds area. Professional Grounds Management Society has an excellent COVID information site. And if you dig a little bit, you can see it, right? You click on that red cross, you'll get to another document that gives you good information about what other guys are doing. See, one of the things that's important at this time is there's many ways to skin this cat. Each of us knows how we have to communicate to people about what's going on. It's important that you get good guidance, right? You don't have to go at it alone. You don't have to reinvent the wheel, but you could tailor what other people are doing for your benefit, right? And the landscape industry, as we talked about, the NALP has done a really good job here as well. All right, let's look at some weather. We do the weather a little bit. This was the soil temperature when we were chatting just a few days ago, last week. And here's what it looks like now. Now you can see in the metropolitan New York area, we're actively moving into the low to mid 50s. Now we're going to see what's going to happen this week. But right now we're in the low to mid 50s and in the upper 30s, 40s throughout the rest of the northeastern United States. What about growing degree days? This was the difference from last year, last week, and here it is this week. Now, a lot of it is blank in this picture because we hadn't generated any degree days yet. And now that we have, you can see the majority of upstate New York is 2 to 3 weeks behind normal in degree days. This is the 30-year average, right? And only to the south, well south of the metropolitan area, right? You look well south here of the here's the New York metropolitan area. You draw a line and you go south, you can see it's much warmer down here. And you get into these areas, and you're 2 to 3 weeks behind. And we're expecting, this was last week's projection. This was last week's, this is this week's. Look at how little this is changing as I toggle back and forth, right? Yes, you're only generating single digit growing degree days in this area here. And now you're still only generating maybe early double digit in the metro area. You've got to go to South Jersey to get in here. And, you're basically not accumulating much at all. We had some snow in Ithaca today. All right. Oops, sorry about that. All right. So what does this mean? How do we put this in perspective? What is it? How is the grass growing? Well, we've learned a lot about tracking grass growth over the last decade, or at least brought back a lot of our thinking with regard to grass growth over the last decade. And fundamentally, this is not a bad rule of thumb to think about, is when the temperature is roughly in the mid to upper 60s. Cool season grasses photosynthesize at their maximum rate, right? And so when you're less than that, you're some percentage of all how the plant could grow. And if you look at an average temperature of 50 degrees, which we're barely going to be at until the middle, the end of next week, we're less than 25%. We're less than 25% of what possibly a grass could grow at this time, right? Less than 25%. So this informs me right now that the grass doesn't want to grow very much. And if I'm limited on resources, I don't want it to grow. I look at the slowing spring as a gift to us in the northeastern United States to slow the landscape from progressing, because if we can't get into it and tend to it with what just the bare minimum things, it's going to really get out of hand quickly if we can't get back to the landscape until June or July. So there's no need to promote anything right now, right, in my opinion, unless you want to fight weeds. If you've got a really thin turf, that's a different story. So the way to start doing this and driving back your regular inputs is think about the thing you spend the most time doing, and that's mowing. And again, the key here is to raise your mowing height, right? If you normally are keeping your lawns at 2 inches, right? By raising them, that means you've got to cut them when they're at 3 inches, which means you're tied to once a week. By raising them an inch, it allows you, by following the Mow 30 rule, the old hashtag Mow 30 rule, which is never remove more than 30% of the leaf tissue in a single mowing. You can mow it when it's 4.5, and that gives you 10 days. You can go to 4, and now you're every 2 weeks. Now, in the springtime, when we get a growth surge, right, when we see that surge in growth in the springtime, right, it may get tighter even at a higher mowing height. But over the long term, it will always require less mowing if you raise the height of cut. So this should be your first move. This should be your first move. Now, as I wrap up, right, the next thing the lawn landscape is thinking about are weeds. And I'm sure everybody's thinking, oh, I got to get the pre's out. He said not the pre's. Well, I got to get those pre's out. What about my broadleaf control? I got dandelion. What? I got these weeds. Okay, listen, we don't know what we can do. I don't know how the state's going to feel about some of these things. We want to be careful with the way we deploy our workforce, apply chemicals, be strategic about it. So why don't we take a minute and look at weeds we may have chronic problems with and what they indicate. Because in many cases, if you got a lawn like this in better shape, right, it wouldn't have as many weeds. Maybe if you just mowed it once in a while, it wouldn't have as many weeds. But you want to be careful, because if we can't mow for a while and you have a thin, weedy lawn, this is what it looks like when you don't mow it. But look at one of the common problems that's there amongst what causes all these thin lawns, lots of weediness. Look at this. Look at how much the word soil shows up in that particular, in this particular way of looking, the way weeds invade lawns, right? So let's, as we transition to our topic for today about soils, right? It's not uncommon to see a really compacted clay soil in a lawn not doing well. And if you have marginal growing conditions, or you're still waiting to green up, it could take longer and to do well and stay thin and then fill with weeds later in the year. This looks like on the left here, a ripe area for crabgrass to invade, right? A surface feeder, doesn't need to get very deep. It's perfectly happy to live in the mat that you leave there. And all you need is a halfway decent soil with very little inputs, and you can get yourself a good lawn there. Oy, right? I'm not, I don't think fertilizer is going to fix this. People say, oh, you need a soil test. Look at this, say you need a soil test. I say, well, I don't know. You need a soil test. Yeah, you need to figure out how to loosen it up. I don't know what you need to test. If you can, maybe you should see if you can crack your head on it, or if it'll break open some cement or something. But you can see the foot tracks and everything else that contribute to these things. So then we see this situation, right? It's very common to say, oh, all right. I don't think many turf managers ever see a problem they don't think poking a hole in it won't fix it. It's like, clean with bleach. It cleans everything, and aerification fixes everything. But what do we know about what the benefits of cultivation are? And this is from our sports turf management website, right? The benefits of cultivation are short-lived. They generally have to be done frequently. High traffic areas where you have compacted soils, 6 to 8 times per year, it could be as high. Now, Doug and I will discuss this. This may be outlandish, but a suggesting coring schedule could entail spring and fall with fertilization, light coring in the summer, early fall, and then keeping them open to take advantage of freezing and thawing if you really have a compacted native soil, right? And so the questions sometimes come up, all right, I often hear I should soil test. So here is the young turfgrass professional here in much younger Rube days, pushing a spreader, right? Talking about the three properties of soils, right? Physical, chemical, and biological, right? And Doug uses this in a lot of his training. And so we'll talk about lawn soil management. And the first question, and I think, Carl, now's a good time to ask it. Which property is usually the cause of most of the issues that we see in the lawn, right? Let's just take a minute and be a little interactive here. Which property is usually the cause? Because, typically somebody will look at this picture, right, and say, oh, I got to test the soil. Right, I got to test the soil, and then come back with a fertilizer recommendation. And maybe, Doug can tell me I'm crazy, but I think I see it enough that, oh yeah, I should do a soil test, which says, okay, now I'm going to come back and I'm going to talk to you about chemical properties. Wait a minute, is that the kind of testing I should have been doing? So, Carl, what do we got for answers there? We getting some sharing?
Yeah, so we've got so far about half the people voted. We got 84% saying physical properties. Nobody yet has said chemical properties.
Excellent.
And then 16% biological properties.
Excellent. Excellent. Yeah. So I think that's my last slide, but I want to go back and keep these pictures up there. I want to look at you guys a little bit now. So, Carl, let's keep in mind these pictures, because then we can look at the three of us and not just stare at slides, huh? Let's make sure we get to these. Do I need to fertilize, Doug? Should I aerify? And what about compost? So let me stop sharing here. We can look at each other. So the survey said physical and biological properties, Doug. Nobody said chemical properties. And I think that's got to be because you've been very effective in getting that message out. And I think in urban areas, it's very obvious, right? Soil physical properties in heavily built environments tend to have more problems than chemical properties. But why don't we start there? Is that true in your mind?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, so our research station, the OJ Nora here in Madison, we do lawn trials all the time. And we find, you can maintain grass in a good looking grass easily without a lot of inputs. And then we go just a mile away to suburbia, and if we try to impose those same treatments on a lawn there, it's not going to work at all. And the difference is our ag research station is built on a nice thick silt loam that used to be growing corn. Mm-hmm. And you move into the urban environment and it's 2 inches of topsoil and then compacted clay. Mm-hmm. So what we've learned over the years, and it's obvious, and it looks like the participants here know it too, is the physical properties of the thing. Like if you don't have a healthy soil, the amount of inputs you need to maintain what we consider acceptable skyrocket.
So what do you make of the comments about biological properties, right? I think we've begun to use the word soil health a lot. And certainly to me, certainly at Cornell, we love soil health at Cornell. But to me, it sort of implies more of the biological properties are considered. One of the things I have taken from all the years of being near soil guys like you is that the physical and biological properties are going to be very intimately linked, right? I mean, is that a fair statement that if you're growing healthy plants and you probably got a good physical soil, that you probably got a good biological life? Do you ever see lots of biological life in crappy soils too?
No, you said it perfectly. They're linked, and the horse is the physical properties, and the cart is the biological. So, and it's all organic matter and air water balance, right? So if you have a lot of organic matter, a nice mix of or good pore space, the biology is going to follow. You look at all the science that's been done, and now we don't know. The thing that the people like Paul Koch and the plant pathologists are working on is like there's millions of organisms and we don't know the first thing about them, and they're trying to figure out how they interact together. But if you just look at the amount of organisms and biological activity, those are driven purely by organic matter and soil physical health. So you get those things right, and the biology, which we don't really understand, will follow, and maybe 10, 20, 30 years down the line, we can start doing testing to see if your biology is a little out of whack. But right now, we just, hey, get those physical properties right, and your biology is going to be fine.
Okay, so perfect. So we set the stage, we teed up the ball. I got to work on physical properties. I can sell aeration. Should a lawn be routinely aerified? Period. Okay, that's my question. Should a lawn soil be routinely aerified?
It depends. So you said it perfectly. It's a Band-Aid. You got to do it consistently in traffic soils. And so like when I see a native, let's use like an athletic field or something. Yeah, you're to keep that thing viable, you're gonna have to airify it 6 to 8 times because the soil can't handle the traffic that's being imposed on it. Okay.
Right.
So what should you do in that case? You should probably be looking at doing a sand cap. You should be looking for solutions to the compaction.
Right.
The aeration, I think really what you're doing is just preparing a seed bed so you can overseed it more effectively. But a lawn, I've lived in suburban area for 15, 16 years now. I've aerified once. And I think that was, I don't know why I did it.
Just out of habit.
Maybe.
Now, I got to say, right? I mean, okay, so let's okay. So routinely for a soil that's sustaining a halfway decent lawn, that what are we doing? I'm worried about weeds coming up now. I'm doing it when I don't have to, especially in the spring with crabgrass, if I, don't do what I have to do. But if I have a thin lawn and I've got a heavy clay soil, and you guys are now telling me I should get those physical properties, that I shouldn't sell them a weed and feed, I should sell them a physical property program, so a physical property improvement program. What's the strategy? And that leads to my question about compost. So you're not going to sand cap a lawn. So let's talk about what a grounds manager or a lawn care provider would talk to their customers about fixing some of these areas that can't sustain a lawn well.
Right. Yeah. So, ideally what you do is incorporate compost into the profile with like a tillage implement and reseed it. But that's basically impossible in almost all situations because you have buried utilities, right? And then who wants to reestablish a lawn? So something I first worked on when I was a student at Cornell in the 2000s was applying layers of compost on top of lawns, and we did that in Rochester and Buffalo, and I think down in Long Island. And we found after about 3 years of putting a 1/4 inch down in the spring and a 1/4 inch down in the fall, that we massively improved those soil physical properties. In the Long Island site, there's a high school field. The physical properties improved, but the field was too heavily trafficked. So it's not, if you have too much traffic, and that picture you showed with all the dead grass outside the door, nothing, you can't, you got to build a sand-based root zone for that. I mean, you're all compost in the world's not going to fix it. You have to manage your traffic. But if the traffic is right, adding compost is going to dramatically fix a crappy soil. And then we've done that. We took that research over here to Wisconsin, found the same thing: 1/4 inch in the spring, 1/4 inch in the fall. You do that for 3 years, and by the end of the 3-year period, you're done. You've improved that root zone enough where you can lower your inputs dramatically.
So what kind of compost? Because you did the biosolid work here at Cornell, and I believe you're recommending a different source because of the potential. When I hear put a 1/4 inch of compost, and I'm thinking, man, I remember when Marty did that when you were here, and my God, wasn't that like 100 times the amount of pee we needed, or then led to runoff problems? So can you separate? Because, okay, I like what you're saying. I can core maybe, and then put the compost on. And if I do it a little, all at once, I'm set for a while. What kind of compost?
Yeah, that's a good point. So the compost we use in New York were poultry and dairy manure compost from
Yummy.
the agriculture industry, and those things come loaded with phosphorus and some nitrogen too. Um, what we did in Wisconsin, though, is because we knew there was a negative result from that. We elevated the soil phosphorus levels in that New York study to the levels. I think the Cornell Soil Lab said we haven't seen levels as high.
I think
Like
it was
there's a
something
high,
like 400 part per million.
I think it's 1,000, like
Oh.
1,200 in some cases, where
And-
like the optimum is like 5. You know, so we worried about the environmental impact of that, and
yeah.
so in a lower phosphorus source compost will be like a municipal yard waste compost, the leaves and the grass clippings. And the good news is that that stuff's even easier to find. So use a municipal compost. They give it away here in Dane County where I live. Make sure it's high quality. You don't want any debris in there that's going to cut people's feet or mess up your mowers. But that's low enough in phosphorus where you're just getting the physical benefit and not all the extra nutrients.
So we've got a few minutes left. Should I be fertilizing my lawn in the northern climates? You spent enough time in New York. You know, we're pretty similar to the way you are, maybe just a week ahead, more so in the urban areas, much like you'd be in Milwaukee and in
Mm-hmm.
downtown Madison. So again, you know, the reflex action that you and I, and we all talked about the first week we did the golf session together. Is there a need to put some fertilizer down in your mind on lawns?
I I don't think, I mean, we're always saying that you want to wait until here, like you said, a similar climate, wait till Memorial Day. Because what you're seeing right now is you see a lot of I'm looking out my window, there's not been fertilization going on. I see a lot of bright green grass. That's the microorganisms in the soil that died over winter. They're decaying. The soil temperatures are getting that 50 point, like you said. It's warm enough where there is some nitrogen there for them to survive on, and in that by that'll sustain the plant through about Memorial Day, and that's why we recommend holding off on that early fertilization, especially in these conditions where you don't want to be mowing and growing more grass than you need to. This is a time to think about maybe waiting a bit.
Excellent. Carl, questions?
Yeah, we got one from Kyle Wickings. He's asking about vermicompost. What do you think about vermicompost, Doug?
Yeah, I haven't worked with vermicompost. I know it's really popular for gardeners to use. I think it's probably great. The main thing you want to do is get a test on the phosphorus level. If the phosphorus levels are reasonable, it's likely going to be a great source. I think the worms process and Kyle, you probably know more about this than I do, but they're processing through the gut of the earthworm and making a really nutrient rich product there. So as long as it's relatively low in phosphorus, the nitrogen could be a huge benefit.
Hey, Carl, can we give Kyle a mic? Kyle, you got a mic? Because, you know, there was a product released a number of years ago in the professional turf market called Worm Power. There's a number of these vermicomposting facilities coming online. I think they make a lot of sense in many ways. But Kyle, you want to talk a little bit about what you think we know about things like Worm Power for improving soil function?
Sure. Yeah, it's a really interesting topic, Doug. This is very, very timely, I think. And my question was because I can't really recall how rich some of those vermicomposts are in P, but I know that if you can get some of the sources that are coming from the same original compost inputs, like a worm power comes from dairy inputs with a nutritionist on staff, so they know exactly what the chemistry of the inputs are. So I think you can get really stable fertility ratios in them, but I'm just not sure how high they are in some of those nutrients. That's something I think we would have to check into on that.
I guess the thing I would say is that when you get into those commercial products like that, I mean, we're talking, you need a massive amount of material to get a 1/4 inch down. So I gravitate towards how much is, can I get the free stuff? And then can I get the stuff where they charge me $5 for a pickup load? But when you start seeing things like, with name brands on them, they become cost prohibitive and they start saying, oh, just spray this little liquid solution down. and at 4 ounces per acre, and then it's going to magically improve your soil property. No, you want to
So,
put down a lot of stuff.
so Carl, I grabbed the screen. If you don't mind, this is what we're
Yep.
talking about. Worm power. This is, a lot of people in the golf course business use this thing. We're not promoting it. Of course, they have the response and thatch reduction and rooting pictures seem very interesting and believable. And then you come down here, and you see the nutrition is virtually non-existent.
So what I'll say about this, though, this is compost tea. This is a liquid, right? Worm power is a liquid. I'm talking about putting down the compost.
Oh, right.
The solid stuff.
Don't they sell a solid too, Kyle? Do they sell a solid too?
Yeah, they did before in their other version before they changed. They had they would screen it for top dressing on golf, and they had a larger particulate. But one point that Doug made about the municipal composts, there are a lot of smaller companies now that seem to be doing vermicomposting out of municipal compost sources. So that may give you some of that consistency in the material that you don't always have with municipal sources, but that might be worth looking into for something like this.
Excellent. All right, Carl, another question.
Yeah, we got a couple questions. I did want to just touch briefly on, Doug was mentioning this is a lot of material. You look at a 1/4 inch over 1,000 square feet. That's 3/4 of a cubic yard just for 1,000 square feet. So once you start getting into some bigger lawns, that becomes a lot of material.
I don't think this is something that you're necessarily going to be doing now, but if conditions warrant, maybe, hey, it's time to start over. This is a chance to rejuvenate. This is a strategy maybe for doing it.
Yeah. So we do have a couple questions on other materials. Kathy mentioned some malorganite. Gary was saying biochar. Maybe you could just briefly touch on what those are and if those are options or not.
I've contributed to malorganite during my days there in Wisconsin. In fact, one time when I was in Milwaukee doing Master Gardener, they shut the water plant down for a few hours, and I got cryptosporidium that I still keep with me to this day. And boy, did I contribute there for a week to the malorganite plant. Yeah, thank you very much. I actually thought it was a conspiracy. We made a big joke about it. Anyway, malorganite is an organic fertilizer, Doug. Sounds like a good idea. Let's start with that one.
Yeah, malorganite's it's made from what we used to call sewage sludge from city Milwaukee. Now we call it biosolids. But again, it's all the things we're talking about. It's reusing something we used to call waste that now has a different use. So it was developed to fertilize turf grass. It's great, but it's no different. It provides 6% nitrogen, 2% phosphorus, and no potassium. In the big scheme, it's no different than it's just a fertilizer from a different source, and it's an effective one. But in terms of it fixing the physical properties,
no fix of the physical properties added in malorganite.
No.
What about biochar, Doug?
Biochar is really cool. It's basically charcoal. You take a woody material and you burn it at low oxygen, and you basically make charcoal. And it's got really unique physical and chemical properties, and specifically it can stabilize the organic matter and keep your organic matter levels high. It can minimize leaching. It hasn't been around long enough for us to really know how to best utilize it, but it's still something that people are playing around with. And if you have a source of biochar, I can't see a lot of negatives to people playing around with it and using it. I do think it's going to be more expensive. Again, a lot of this physical stuff, you got to put down a lot of material. So anytime you start saying, hey, spray this liquid solution at 4 ounces per acre, I start saying, yeah, that's not going to do anything for physical. So same thing with the biochar, you're just sprinkling on fairy dust. It might be the best stuff in the world, but if you're not putting down a lot of it, it probably isn't going to help. So low cost, large volume, that's the best way to handle soil physical properties.
And maybe, Frank, we can end on one last question. I think this is a good one to end on.
Perfect.
Michael's asking from the Midwest, aerifying question. Coring is less likely for him and harder to do than solid tine. Is solid tine okay? Maybe this connects to some stuff we talked
it's a
about
good
earlier.
question, and I'd love to hear what Doug says. I was chatting about this with the big guy in Nebraska yesterday, Rockaswa, that one of the things we like about a solid tine operation oftentimes is if you can get it deep enough and it gives you some of that kick and shattering that in a native soil system, if you've got a compacted soil like we've been talking about, some shattering from a solid tine to me is better than pulling a core and bringing up soil that then I've got to deal with some other way. If I feel like I can do the soil at the right moisture content, and a lot of it is going to be based on moisture content, then I'm a little fond of more fracturing than I feel like I want to pull up a core. But I want to hear what the resident soil scientist says.
Yeah, I was thinking about the other big guy, Marty Petrovic. I think this is what he did his PhD on,
Yes.
Michigan State. And in my perspective, is the counterpoint is I think if you do it enough, you're eventually going to create a hard pan layer. Even if you are fracturing and you get some of that benefit, I worry that consistent use of that on a native soil, you're packing that material down. I love it in sand. I love it in sand because sand you can't compact. It just pushes the sand to the side. But in a native soil with clay content, I worry that you're going to get a layer eventually.
Okay, so what happens if I can put a tine with a point on it and go in and kick back and go out and go in and kick back and go out? That's what I'm thinking about versus going in and coming out with a core.
Right. Yeah, I think you can do it. Soil physical research is just slim pickings too. I mean, because measuring these things is hard. The way that we can measure the benefit of that is difficult to do because of the way water flows through pore spaces. But yeah, I would vary it. I would be varying my tine width. I'd be wearing the depth. I like the kick.
Right.
But we just don't have a lot of evidence to be like, yeah, this is the thing you got.
Now, lawns. One of the problems I got with just general aerification of lawns is the drum rollers don't go deep.
No.
The one we're using, the Billy Goat, is a vertical drive, but I feel like I have to go over the lawn multiple times to even impact a few percentage points of the surface. So before we wrap up, Doug, let's just have a minute about, if I got a drum that goes yo deep versus a tine that I can get 4 inches deep or 2 inches deep or variable depth deep, which do I want?
I've talked to the lawn guys about this. Like, why do you use these crappy air fryers? And guys who've been in golf and they know that these things don't do a lot of good. It's like, just do one. You're going to hit a rock and it's going to flip the machine over. So I think when we know that the soil's good and there's no rocks in it, or no massively compacted layers, those deeper vertical penetration tools work. But in reality, with the landscapes, and we're in a glacial, both of us are sitting in glaciated landscapes with rocks near the surface that get moved up by frost heaving every year. You hit a rock and you're out of commission for the day. So that's why my recommendation is build up the soil with compost to create a new root zone rather than trying to fix the crap that's under there with deep tining or vertical shaft aeration.
Mm-hmm. Well, that seems like a perfect place to end on physical properties and the long-term challenges that they create when you can't just till it in and all the things that make that hard to do. Doug, so great to see you, pal. Take care of yourself. Carl, I'll pass it back to you. We're done for the day. We just made it at 39.
There you go. Yeah, and there's a couple more questions, but I'm going to keep those for other sessions too. A couple good questions on mulching leaves and stuff like that.
We'll be back next week.
That's right. Yeah, again, thanks to Doug and even Kyle for jumping on here.
Thanks, Kyle.
Giving us a hand. We'll see you guys next week.
Good to see you all.
Thanks
Take
a
care.
lot, guys. Take care. See you guys.
This has been a production of Cornell University, on the web at cornell.edu.